yeah, I wanted to. There we are. Um, so I wanted to start at the beginning, how this project started. Uh, so from the materials you sent me, I guess the genesis of this project was an oral history of werewolf bar mitzvah.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that project and how it led to the book.
I mean, I always have loved just taking a joke and going way too far with it. And I feel like that is like the like prime cultural example of doing just that is like they were like, what is a wild thing we can do? We talked about like having Tracy Jordan having this record that is both a bar mitzvah record and a Halloween novelty record, and he just completely selling out and making this thing. So I interviewed Robert Carlock from the show talking about it. I talked with the writer who the one Jewish writer on staff who they went to for all references, and I was sort of just like thought this was just a fascinating thing. It's like one of the first big recordings by Childish Gambino, since he does Tracy's voice when Tracy didn't make it into the studio for part of the song. But I just wanted to dive into that, and then people really loved it, so I started thinking about what else could be done with this, and then Jameson from Abrams Books reached out to me, and we talked about doing like a whole book about 30 Rock. And there's just so many interesting stories over the course of the show. I'm somebody who watched both 30 Rock and Studio 60. Like I enjoyed both of those things.
You're a rare bird.
Exactly. I'm not taking sides, man. I just I was
some of us like the Beatles and the Stones.
Exactly. So I was very excited to like dive into these stories, interviewed dozens and dozens, like, and by the end, more than 50 different interviews for this book. And yeah, it was just really exciting to get to, watch the show a couple times, talk with everybody about it, and yeah, just the delight.
Yeah, so it's interesting because now Tina Fey, the creator and star of 30 Rock, is kind of like basically on comedy Mount Rushmore. I mean, I think we all agree that she's one of the great comedy geniuses of her generation, all that. But yeah, like pre 30 Rock, she that was not her place in pop culture. Yeah, talk a little bit about kind of Tina Fey and what she was doing kind of leading up to 30 Rock.
Yeah. I think that comedy fans knew her from SNL, but she did Weekend Updates, I think sort of helped make Weekend Update more of a thing in just like the early days of stuff going viral, early days of online video, but it was still like not quite there yet. So it wasn't quite the type of thing that you get a few years later where like every SNL segment, the good ones are all passed around online. But I think people really loved her being paired with Amy Poehler and Jimmy Fallon on that show. So she had a little bit of a name in the comedy community, and she'd also done Mean Girls. She wrote that, and that was out there, but she wasn't like a star yet. And she even said herself that like she was not good in sketches. Like she didn't love doing sketches on SNL. So she like ended up going on to, they were developing this show, and they weren't totally sure. Like they knew she was a genius. They wanted to do something cool with Tina Fey, and like they even turned down her first idea of a show because she wanted to do a show about like cable news, sort of doing like a Fox Newsy type thing, and they were like, no, just do something about late night, like do what you know. And like then she ended up creating this thing that didn't have great ratings at first, and like they picked up another show about the same thing with Studio 60 that were both about late night comedy, both loosely inspired by SNL, and they were it was not expected to succeed, and yet it went 7 seasons. And then Tina Fey was still like a minor star, and it sort of took some time for people to get into her and for her to get established. It was really like season 3 when she was like, everyone's like, Sarah Palin, the vice presidential candidate for John McCain, came around, and everyone's like, oh, she looks just like Tina Fey. And that was at the same time she did that. It helped 30 Rock's ratings. It sort of pushed Tina Fey to that next level. And it was just like such an interesting like rise over those first few years.
Yeah, that's so funny because there's the 30 Rock plot line eventually where Tracy looks like a vice presidential candidate. So
I love that bit. Yeah, like I love that they always were taking the real world and putting it into the show. And mocking themselves. Tracy, like there's so many things that Tracy did in real life that ended up in the show, from his drunk driving arrests to his diabetes, to there's so many things that they turned into storylines in like a loving way. Sometimes like it got a little dark, but they really found like the like perfect joke for each of these things.
Yeah, so I think before we talk more about 30 Rock, I think we do have to talk a little bit about Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. As you mentioned, it was a weird Armageddon Deep Impact situation where were these two projects that were, kind of the same pitch. Talk a little bit about, so you actually talked to Studio 60 cast members for this book. What did you learn, and what do you think is the legacy of Studio 60?
It was really fascinating. I had a chance to talk with Bradley Whitford, Nate Cordry from Studio 60. And Nate Cordry is interesting because he actually guest starred on 30 Rock seasons later as Liz Lemon's gay neighbor. So it was interesting to sort of like hear his whole evolution. Studio 60, it was about, a sketch comedy show where they bring back these old writers, and it was also kind of inspired by Aaron Sorkin's real life and getting fired from NBC and having a drug problem, and then coming back to NBC in this like big moment, which was what Studio 60 was supposed to be. Like, it's the guy who made The West Wing, this like classic of television, and he came back and was going to do it again with Studio 60. And it was such a weird moment because, he came back, he wrote the show, the pilots really got great dialogue. It's very Sorkin-y. He has like certain themes he always goes to, but they also picked up 30 Rock at the same time. But like talking with Nate Cordry, talking with other execs and so forth from NBC at the time, like the general image at the time was that NBC wanted to protect their relationship with Lorne Michaels from SNL, with Tina Fey, and so they were picking up the show. Some said like as maybe a favorite of Lorne, and didn't really expect it to go that far. But then when the ratings started coming in, Studio 60 had better ratings than 30 Rock to start out, but did not have as big ratings as they expected, and it kept like going down and down. I talked to Bradley Whitford, and he was saying when they got the ratings from the first episode, he was just thought they were dead men walking, because it was like they like, for as much as they were paying this all-star cast with like Matthew Perry, they had Judd Hirsch, there were so many great actors on the show. They were like, we can't be getting this much money on a show that costs this much, because it's like 1 hour dramas cost more than comedy. And given that, he's like, there's no way this can last. And the critics liked it at first, but started to turn against it after the first episode, understandably, because the one thing Aaron Sorkin can't do is write comedy sketches.
Right.
I was a comedy nerd. I was doing sketch comedy at the time, just getting into that, and I was watching it. Like, they was not like, whenever they try doing comedy, they tell you this is genius, and then it would not be. 30 Rock avoided that by saying that the fictional late night show of 30 Rock was a bad show. They were like, TGS, this is not a funny show. This is a hack show. They would use sketches like Fart Doctor. They would intentionally like not make you expect the sketches to be the thing. While Studio 60 kept showing the sketches until they finally figured out, just put somebody in a funny costume and you don't show the sketches. Just tell people it's genius and don't actually do that.
Show them coming off stage.
They finally sort of figured it out. It was kind of too late for Studio 60 at that point.
I do know a lot of people in the kind of TV writing business that kind of watched Studio 60 in the same way that one would watch Birdemic or The Room. Is that your opinion of it? Is that, or do you think
that was very much what I heard from I talked with folks from the 30 Rock Writers Room, and they were saying that like in the very, they were excited every day after Studio 60 because it would be talked about in the 30 Rock Writers Room the next day. That was what they were very hyped about. They were like, they thought there were some good bits in it, but then they were like, what sort of weird comedy attempts are they going to make next? And also it was interesting because at the same time as that, the Studio 60 folks were kind of arrogant about it to some extent. Like, especially, I talked with Nate Corddry, he was saying how he just was like, obviously 30 Rock's going nowhere. And, obviously, Studio 60, my career is made, this is going to be a huge thing. And then he was saying he was hanging out with some friends at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater here in LA and was backstage, and he heard some of his friends making fun of Studio 60 and realized, oh no, like maybe this isn't good. Like he thought he loved the scripts, like he did not have the right eye toward it to realize what was going wrong. And he just loved the Sorkin dialogue and was like, this is amazing and great sort of playwriting to do, and didn't realize it until he started hearing from other folks saying this is not going well.
You mentioned the 30 Rock Writers Room. I think it's worth talking about that. Like, obviously, it in everybody's mind, it's kind of the Tina Fey, opus, but a lot of cool people were involved in the 30 Rock Writers Room. Talk about who was there and who you talked to for the book.
Yeah, it was such an amazing room. Like Tina Fey wrote the pilot herself, but pretty early on, they brought on Robert Carlock, who had worked on Friends and the Friends spinoff Joey, and worked on some other shows to help run this show with Tina, because like she couldn't be in the writers' room all the time because she was starring in the show, so she had to go be on set. And so they brought in her. They brought in a really killer lineup to start that first season. It was Donald Glover's first big TV writing gig. Before Community, before he became known as before he was Lando Calrissian.
Right.
He was in the 30 Rock Writers Room as like the one person of color in that room, which is like, I was talking with one of the other writers who said like, it's crazy that like you have to be as talented as Donald Glover to break in at that time as a person of color into TV writing. And, he was just such a genius but happened to have, be blowing up. He was like early internet comedy, had videos going around when he was still in college. He was still an RA in his dorm when he started working on 30 Rock, wow. Because he was, very young and happened to hit right then. But there were great people. Kate Hannon, who was like writing Pitch Perfect while she was in the writer's room for 30 Rock, would like, write all day for them and then go home at night and work on Pitch Perfect. Tracy Wickfield wasn't there at the beginning, but she joined as a writer's assistant and worked her way up season to season. So she co-wrote the finale with Tina Fey and went on to create Great News. She's doing the Saved by the Bell reboot. Just amazing talent that came through there. Like I was looking at all these writers, and then like I'm always seeing them pop up in other shows. Like one of the later writers, Vali Chandrasekaran, who was there for a while, ended up running Modern Family. There were just and writers who went on to do drama shows too. Like I'm a superhero nerd. I like comics, and I saw that one of the writers who was on the later seasons writes on the DC Stargirl show over on the CW now, and I know Andrew Guest was a writer assistant there who's now doing big dramas, but it's just, it was such a great room. I think Tina Fey had great taste in picking out those writers. I talked with writer Daisy Gardner from the first season, and she talked about how Tina Fey was walking down the street in New York with Rachel Dratch, picked up the phone, called her as their sort of final pass, and she was super nervous, but Tina Fey was just like, I just want to make sure you're not a nut. I want to make sure that I am cool hanging out with you in the middle of the night when we're writing way too late. And that was the room where just they established a vibe, they established a comedic sensibility. Even took the show though a few episodes to find its voice. But yeah, it was just a great team.
Yeah, no, let's talk about that voice that it's so interesting if you binge 30 Rock, which I think probably a lot of that's how a lot of people experienced it. But I was not live, but just like when it was on streaming services. It's so interesting because it does, it does start out kind of grounded. It does start out, this showbiz satire that takes place in the real world. But by the end, and I mean this in the best way, it is a cartoon. It's a cartoon with live actors. There's a gag in the final season where Jenna is she's like the spokesperson for like the wool committee, and when she goes to like meet the wool committee, it's a talking sheep and then a sentient pile of wool. So there's just like supernatural stuff, there's talking animals, they don't explain it. Kenneth is immortal. Jenna has all these weird experiences with oh gosh, who's the celebrity that like catapulted her into the Hollywood sign? Somebody in the Mickey Rourke.
Yes, Mickey Rourke. Yes, her sexual experiences with Mickey Rourke, where Mickey Rourke broke her down sexually and built her back up.
Right. Yes. So it does start out this kind of grounded show, and then just becomes this bananas joke bucket where you genuinely don't know what's going to happen next. Like, and I'm saying that with like love. I like that. Yes. That's where it went.
That's what I love about the show.
Yeah. Did that come up in your interviews for the book? Like, was it a conscious decision to just make it more imaginative, or is that just kind of something that happened because that's what people liked writing?
I think it happened sort of partway through the first season. Like Tina Fey said that they wanted to make like the next Cheers. Like they were trying to write like the big mainstream sitcom, but they didn't quite succeed in that. It was just like the writers in this room, I think especially Robert Carlock, like he has a really unique, funny voice that I think that as one of the co-showrunners, like that sort of melded with what Tina Fey found was funny. And I think that gave that weird vibe to the show. I know that as the seasons progressed, they got more and more cartoony. And I think it's also because like, I mentioned being a comic fan, like they had a real continuity to it where they would take like the most obscure reference from like the pilot or elsewhere in season one and then build on that. Like I talked with the writers and they would talk about, they'd always go back to the pilot and look for like, what haven't we explored yet that we, mentioned in the pilot that is like an idea that we could really dive into and play with. And that led to like so much of the show. And even like the early episodes, like there's a bit in one of the early episodes where Jack Donaghy, Alec Baldwin's character, says how he's playing poker with Kenneth, but he can't read him. And so he says that in 5 years, we're all either going to be working for him or be dead by his hand. And then like they started thinking like, wait, how do we make that come true? Right. And so they sort of played with like promoting Kenneth in the hierarchy, but also making him like a weird, maybe dangerous guy in some weird ways, so that like it could be that he really is responsible for them all to be dead in the end. I think that they sort of like found this weird voice, and they had like crazy characters. Like Pee Wee Herman did a great guest star appearance in the first season as an inbred prince from the and was just an absolute delight. I'd say one of my personal highlights doing this book was getting to interview Pee Wee Herman, because talking with Paul Reubens and like someone who I've been a fan of since I was a kid, and he talked about just like what a joy it was to be on this strange show and that like really wrote to like his sensibility. Like one thing I heard from, I was talking with Grizz, and he was saying how Tina Fey would like just watch people and would like sort of see the way they interacted and then would write that into the show. And I think that's what happened with a lot of the guest stars, a lot of the great performers, and like why the show becomes so weird is they're taking your weird thing and making it super huge. And it was always amazing.
Yeah, it does seem like that Paul Reubens guest star bit kind of like, kind of predicted what the show was going to become. Like there was some weird stuff before, but that was very weird. And then, it does seem like they're kind of like, let's do more of this. Like that, Casually, that's kind of what it seems.
That was like the end of their original pickup too, was that was they were getting close to that with that Paul Reubens episode. Like they didn't know if they were going to be getting more episodes like the rest of the season. And like they apparently like the around the writer's room, they called that set Goodbye America, because they thought that this might be the end. But it ended up getting just good enough ratings to get another 9 episodes. It ended up continuing to get like doing just well enough to hold on. And it's a thing where like if it came like a couple years later, it probably would have gone straight to streaming. Or if it came a couple years earlier, it would have not had the ratings and been crushed by shows like Friends and all these other shows out there that with huge numbers of viewers, but it hit that sweet spot and they let it just be this like weird show. And it also was kept on because they did some product placement and did it in a really smart, self-aware way. Like they had the Snapple bottle guy show up randomly out of an elevator and just do a scene talking about how much they love Snapple. And it was
Cisco telepresence.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's just an interesting, like, if you look at when it happened, because like, it's funny thinking about it as a reaction to Friends, because, Friends became, there's a lot of great joke writing in Friends, but it seems like kind of it was the juggernaut it was because of the soap opera elements, the kind of will they, won't they stuff. And, and Friends, can be a very sappy show. And like, whereas 30 Rock does have some genuine emotional moments, like it is, its primary job is to be a joke bucket. Mm-hmm. Talk about where it kind of falls in TV, because it seems like maybe even now our comedies are, like if you look at Ted Lasso and Schitt's Creek, like those have a lot of funny things in them, but like, it is not the machine gun that, exactly. It's kind of about like spending time with lovable characters who are funny because you love them.
Which is
that's
like
not
also,
quite what 30 Rock is.
You also learn to love the characters on 30 Rock, but it's also definitely not that. Like Alec Baldwin and Tina Fey had an agreement from the beginning that they didn't want Liz and Jack to get together. Yeah. And they like told the writers' room this. Like I managed to get a hold of notes from the first day of the writers' room and was going through these. And like from the beginning, they're like, they're not getting together. This is a mentor relationship. That's what they wanted to do a show about. So they go on and they, they like the first season, especially, they keep like semi-teasing, like maybe they could get together, but then immediately telling no, they're not going to. Right. Like they have like, Jack gets disgusted by Liz. Liz thinks Jack's like a mean boss, and they're opposite politically, etc. And like it could have been like the opposite sexual attention thing, but they every time it gets anywhere close to that, they like decide no, we're not going there. We're never going to go there. There are a bunch of times when like it looks like characters may get together, but then they either don't or they do off camera. Or they like, there's like Grizz and Liz have one kiss at a party when they're drunk, and then Grizz keeps referencing it the rest of the series. Yeah. But like it means nothing. And that's sort of their approach to love on this show. Uh-huh. And also they never really give Liz a relationship that is any good. Like every time they keep they have her with a real loser at the beginning. They could bring in John Hamm, who's the biggest dummy in the world, it turns out, despite being amazingly handsome, loses both his hands and gets them replaced by hooks. And it was like they just sort of paired her with losers over and over, and they were sort of like, the show is not about romance, it's about mentorship, it's about friendship. And I think that was one thing where they built it to the point where by like season 7, you sort of have these feelings for these characters. And in season 7, they kind of did the emotional things that you wanted them to do. Yeah. Like they gave you like a wedding. They gave you like a Jack and Liz actually being forced to sleep in the same bed, and what happens there, and sort of give you these like big climactic payoffs. And did it very intentionally because they knew it was the last season, so they went in like. And like they studied like all the great last seasons and like how do you finish a show off strong.
Kind of on the topic of like 30 Rock is from a very particular time in TV. I think that like with that, like comes some baggage. I think, 30 Rock was in the news not too long ago because they had to pull down some episodes from streaming that had blackface jokes in them. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about like how, like, with as much as we love the show, like it does have some like shitty jokes in it that,
Yeah.
maybe are a little too mean. Like, how do you feel about that? And did that come up in your interviews at all with the people involved?
It really did. Like, it was something that, going back and watching the show, like, I just, I started working on the book at the end of 2019 and was working on it through 2020. And watching the show, a lot of these jokes really hit you when you watch them in 2020, 2021, where, like the first season, there's a lot of use of like offensive terms that we probably wouldn't use now. Bad terms for trans people. There are a lot of things in there that were very accepted culturally at the time, very accepted, even especially in the comedy world, maybe.
Yeah.
I know that we've become like more sensitive to what we make fun of. But I think that part of the problem was because there was a lack of diversity at the time, you didn't have anyone who was like empowered to say, maybe don't say that, like don't do that joke, because it was like largely white writers' rooms, like maybe like one diverse person in there, maybe a woman in the writers' room, which is a crazy idea for some shows. And I talked with Daisy Garner, was saying how like that it was kind of a diverse show for the time, because most rooms you have like one woman, and this room there were three, which is a lot for a show at the time. And yeah, like they did his blackface storylines. Like the first one they did was in season 3, and it was Jenna and Tracy like have a real argument about race and gender, and like, is it harder for white women or for black men? And there's like a real point to it, and they're like having like some sort of like social critique in it. And it was a thing where I talked with one of the crew members who was black, and he was saying how he didn't mind that time when they had her in race changing makeup, as Tina Fey called it later on. He didn't mind it because he thought they were making a point that was like relevant to Black people, and that was something worth discussing. Then again, in season 5, they did one of the most absurd jokes they ever did, where it's Jenna and her partner at the time, Paul, do a couple's costume for Halloween of Black Swan, where he is dressed up like the Natalie Portman Black Swan movie character, and she is dressed up as football player Lynn Swan with black makeup. And it was like, there's no point to it other than that she's a foolish person. So it was that I talked with, Kevin Latson, the prop master, and he was saying how he was watching this and was like, are we doing this? Like, he was like felt hurt by this. But like, the boss of the show are whites. There are not many minority writers. There's not many, people he felt empowered to go to. So he like saw this person coming out in costume, and he just had to like go to his office and, be sad, because there wasn't like an outlet for that. He said he's talked to Tina about it since. And, I think that Tina Fey herself, like, has sort of had a growth in her awareness, but also, still had race problems in other shows. There was a lot of criticism of how she handled Native Americans and Asian Americans on Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which came after this. So it's, I think it's, as far as my personal thoughts on it, I think comedy is really hard. I think that doing it well is, you have to like swing big. I read this like sort of academic thing about comedy that was talking about how like good comedy is like a benign violation. It's where like you get someone breaks the rules and violates you, but like in a way that feels safe. But like it turned out that we were doing that for decades, where it was like jokes that made white people feel safe or men feel safe, while we were making other people feel unsafe. So, but I hope that I think we're moving away from that. But it's a hard thing to go back and look at.
Yeah, it's interesting, kind of hearing you kind of talk about all this as it relates to like comedy theory. You're a guy who has had a lot of comedy writing experience. You've done sketch and improv at UCB and elsewhere. Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about what it was like from your point of view writing this book. Yeah, as a person who has done some comedy themselves. And actually,
Yeah.
before you answer, I will mention that we're about to the Q&A portion of this little talk. So if you have any cues, you can throw them into the chat. And I'll go ahead and read them off. But so yeah, get those questions in. But yeah, now let's hear from Mike. How was it writing this book about comedy as someone who's done a lot
Yeah.
of comedy themselves?
I mean, Tina Fey is one of my heroes, of course. Like went back and reread Bossy Pants while I was working on this. And, I went to UCB and studied the IO West, which is like, Tina Fey did ads for them. And it's, it's like you said, part of the comedy Mount Rushmore. I think that it was something where I was sort of went back and like looked at my own comedy when I was doing this. I switched to writing more drama type stuff the last few years, and I think it's like comedy's really hard to do well. And we see like a show like Ted Lasso, like our comedies and our dramas are getting more mixed up with each other because it's sort of like to be really funny. Sometimes you have to like show these people as people too, so that it doesn't feel like you're like making fun of someone and then the those characters go away after you're done mocking them. But I think it's part of this whole shift in how our comedy works now. But yeah, like I think that it's really a good thing, and I think you could still be really funny. Like there's still really funny shows. I think that a movie that I saw a couple years ago that I was like, is this the funniest? Is this my favorite movie now? Was a movie Long Shot that was with like Seth Rogen. Yeah, exactly. It's a great movie. Charlize Theron, and like written by a woman, because I think it like had a perspective where it was making fun of power, made fun of politics, made fun of things that are fun to make fun of because it's not like a hurtful thing. It's not mocking people. It's like you are able to find comedy still. And like you can still make funny movies. Like people say like, oh, cancel culture. We can't make jokes about these things anymore. But like you really can. Like there's still amazingly funny stuff happening. Like the Bo Burnham Inside special that came out on Netflix over the pandemic, I thought was hilarious and like so insightful and relatable, but also really funny. So I think that it's just, I think there's a tightrope to walk, but there always has been. And it's, you just have to like, stay up to date on the culture, I think. I think that the people who are complaining about it are people who haven't done that.
Well, yeah, I think that's a nice note to enter our Q&A on. Yeah, I'm gonna read this one from Rebecca. Rebecca asks, "Oh, this is really interesting, and I kind of want to. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Where do you see 30 Rock's influence most in comedy today? Obviously, Girls Five Eva, but anywhere else? Yeah, Girls Five Eva. By the way, great show. As a 30 Rock fan, I think people should definitely check it out. But yeah, there's so many kind of like Tina Fey, Robert Carlock, pod shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they're sort of like comedy Johnny Appleseeds.
Yeah,
where the folks from their writers' rooms are going out and making these great shows. I think that I feel like the person who's done it best so far is Tracy Wakefield. I think Saved by the Bell is probably the most inclusive show on TV right now that has like the most diverse cast and is subverting something from the 80s and 90s in a really cool new way. I think that Girls Five Eva is great. There are so many good shows. I think that it's of note that like some of those shows are created by women who were in the writers' rooms with Tina Fey and like were able to take that sensibility and then like take it to another level too. It's interesting because like Tina Fey's own shows, I feel like Kimmy Schmidt like dove further into that Carlock Tina Fey voice, but now they're working on Mr. Mayor on NBC, which I think feels like them trying to do that big broad sitcom again. And it's I think that it's more successful at doing that, but it's lacking a little bit of the sort of specific jokes that they popularized in 30 Rock. But I think that legacy is being continued by Tracy Wakefield, and Tina Fey guest starred over on Girls Five Eva. I think that there are a lot of other shows too where it was part of the beginning of single camera comedies on TV too. Like, we don't have very many shows that have big audience, like live audiences and laugh tracks anymore, and I think 30 Rock was a big part of that influence. And having these specific jokes, you have like a generation of comedy writers who were like, oh, this is what comedy is supposed to be. And now that's sort of what the mainstream comedy became coming after it, even though maybe the audience wasn't quite there for it at first. Audiences aren't as big anymore, but that's okay, because you have these sort of more targeted streaming things where people can find the thing that is theirs and that really fits them.
Gabriel asks, how would you recast the X-Men into the MCU using characters from the cast of 30 Rock? The question we all wanted to know the answer to.
I mean, I know it's been the subtext of this whole conversation.
Sure, so, yeah. I'm sorry I didn't get to it. So yeah, thank you to Gabriel for asking that.
I have to say, Liz is the Cyclops in that she is always being picked on. She thinks she's in charge, but really has no real power. She is kind of the one who is a bummer and pouring water on everyone's fun. And yeah, like maybe her mean stare is like an optic blast. I think that you could put Jack into the Professor X role just because he is always abusing his power. He is always acting a little shady behind the scenes. Like, Professor X is always up to something, especially now in the comics. Like, he's become a bit devious. So I put Jack in that role. I'm trying to think of who it'd be. Like the Wolverine, just because like I guess that's. Well, it has to be the Canadian, so I guess Cheyenne Jackson, his character would be the Wolverine, and the guy who's like seems like the underdog but comes in and does a great job. So I think that those are a few of my castings. I'd love to hear Gabriel's castings for X-Men characters as part of 30 Rock. I'm gonna have to rewatch it with that in mind.
Yeah, Gabriel, if you have any arguments with Mike's picks, please feel free to throw those into the chat. Jameson asks, did you have a favorite interview for the book? Yeah, this is a great question.
I think that a personal favorite was really Bradley Whitford, just because he was very open and like was able to have some perspective on his own work. I think that that's a hard thing to do. 30 Rock started 15 years ago. It went off the air like 9 years ago. So it is, a show that is still close to a lot of people, and it's still like, there are people who are in power who worked on that show. There are people who have reputations to protect. And I think that because of that, it's there are still people who feel uncomfortable talking about stuff. It was also a weird time to talk about this past year because that whole controversy of blackface episodes getting pulled from the show. There are definitely people who clamped up a little bit after that happened and didn't necessarily want to talk about 30 Rock at that time. And like, we're, dealing with a lot, as we all were during the pandemic. But I think that I just really appreciate Bradley Whitford sort of jumping in and being open to stuff. And I always, of course, appreciate talking to like the legends, like had a chance, Alan Alda was cool. Patti LuPone, who is Frank's mom on the show, was a really lovely interview, and was somebody who was just like so kind and surprisingly like down to earth. And like I know that she had like read Judith Friedlander's book and was like actually had a great time working on the show. I think that the interesting thing is that like for a lot of people, like 30 Rock is like a thing they did, but like especially for the performers, I think a lot of it was like we have these friendships from the show, but like these you're not going to necessarily remember storylines or like individual episodes. It's more like we are this was like an experience, and I have sort of a general feeling about it. But so I love people who could get specific, which tended to be the writers more often, and other actually production people behind the scenes, because they were sort of like, this was like a big part of their lives. and like there really was sort of like a family element to this, where like a lot of the production folks, they use the same crew on like other shows. Like a lot of them have gone on to work on, I was talking with someone who was going on to work on Girls Five Eva behind the scenes when we were doing our interviews, and it's she's likes working with the same people, and it's sort of kept that going.
All right. Yeah, I did. I want to hear this from you, and I want to know if your interviewees had an opinion on this. Do you have a favorite single 30 Rock joke? And was there anything that came up, for that question while you were doing interviews? I think, for a lot of people, it is Werewolf Bar Mitzvah. Spooky, scary, boys becoming men becoming wolves. But yeah, do you have a personal favorite? And was there a favorite gag joke storyline that came up again and again?
I think that it was, it varied. Some folks were on the show at different times, so they had different parts they remember more clearly. I think that a personal sort of favorite that I probably didn't stick in my memory as much from the time, but rewatching it, I was like, this is amazing, was all of the storylines with her love interest, Wesley Snipes, who is not the actor Wesley Snipes, but is a British man, right, more befitting of the name Wesley Snipes. I just love that they are so not right for each other, and Fate keeps pushing them together. And it was like, it's sort of is what 30 Rock's all about, is it's like the anti-love interest. They were being like, the show isn't about love interest. This is about how people deal with each other, whether that's at work or outside the office. It's like, it's a workplace comedy, but it's not trying to like up the stakes to the point of being about romance in the end. I just love every time that he is coming up to her and insisting that she settle on him, and it is just like her pain that she goes through as she deals with this is kind of great. I think that the show has like you sort of can demarcate like the eras of the show by those love interests, and you're like, here's Wesley, here's John Hamm's character, here's James Marsden coming on later. And I always enjoyed seeing like how they would mess with those actors. Or like Matt Damon was pretty fun too. I enjoyed him as Carol. Did a great job as the pilot. Like maybe my favorite joke is actually when they're sitting, like Tina Fey has to confront him. She's stuck on a plane with him as the pilot, and they're stuck on the runway, and he keeps telling them it'll be about half an hour until she revolts, leads a revolt against her boyfriend, and ends their relationship.
Then the people on the plane are constantly having to watch the Guardians of Ga'Hoole.
Yes, they are stuck watching CGI animation over and over again. I think that I love the idea on that show where the point of the show is also kind of like that everyone's an idiot. Like it's not just like Jenna and Tracy, it's also Liz, it's also like everyone ends up being a fool in the end of this thing. And it did a great job just like attacking self-seriousness and getting after the very same kind of thing that Studio 60 was guilty of. I remember like there's like an infamous bit from Studio 60 where Nate Cordry's character is defending to his parents the idea of sketch comedy, and like he's like, it's not skits, this is sketch comedy. It's like, you're in the opera house of sketch comedy, and is like talking about how meaningful this is and incisive. And then his parents tell him like, well, your brother's in Afghanistan. And
oh boy, yeah.
And it's like so
right.
self-serious,
right.
And like they like Nate Cordry like didn't totally get it at the time, and like it took. But I know I talked to Brad Whitford. He's saying like they're sitting around at the table reading. And he's like, we're in Afghanistan now. Like what's going on here? But yeah, it was. Talking with folks about the show, I think that everyone sort of has their favorite bits. I think that everyone, of course, loves being featured when they are performers. It was interesting to see like how people have their ups and downs, and there are characters who like become more prominent. Like one thing that I thought was really interesting was in season 5, I might not have noticed it at the time, but like Tracy Morgan was out getting surgery, dealing with he was getting a new kidney, and they sort of gave Pete, Scott Adams' characters, more storylines, and it was kind of delightful to see like a character who had sort of not found his place for a while. They do a great storyline where he becomes an arm wrestling champion, and they do a bit where Pete gets to be like it turns out he was in a weird 80s band, that he was in Loverboy for a while, and they shoot like a whole music video for that. And I loved getting to see them give other characters a chance to shine like that.
Awesome. So I think we are about out of time here. Looking for, getting a nod from our moderator. So if people don't know already, you can buy a copy of the book from a link in the chat, get it signed, get it personalized, guaranteed to increase in value. That's my personal guarantee, not from anyone official. Mike,
you official, Jordan. You're my official when it comes to book value.
Thank you. So. Yes, guaranteed to increase in value. Make sure you click that link there in the chat and grab yourself a copy of 30 Rock book. I will mention, because we have a bunch of readers watching this, that if you would like to read a graphic novel or give one this holiday season, I have co-authored this book. It is called Bubble. It is a sci-fi comedy. Ideally, we were shooting to have the joke density of a 30 Rock episode. So if you like a lot of weird jokes, Bubble, not for kids, but it'll do you right if you're
you've already checked off 2 of your Christmas presents if you get these 2 books.
There you go. Yes, yeah. 30 Rock first, of course. Buy that, but then if you got a little extra Christmas dough /holiday dough, you can grab a copy of Bubble at your local indie bookstore. I think that is about it. Thanks everybody for coming. This was a really fun chat. Mike, I cannot wait to read the book. That's the sentence I was trying to say.
Pleasure, Jordan. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for coming out. This has been a real joy. Be sure to go on, get your book. I will sign it to you, and we will get those sent out to you. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Dropped a link for Bubble too if you want to
buy there you go. You're sweet. Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Thank y'all so much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.